West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Day 132 of the Biden administration. The president indeed marked this national holiday with a deeply personal remembrance and a passionate defense of democracy. And that's because this Memorial Day 2021 comes at such an uneasy time in our nation's modern history. Biden began the day at Arlington Cemetery with Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, honoring those Americans who died on battlefields. After laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown, Biden spoke of his late son, Beau, and reflected on the fallen veterans who he said made the ultimate sacrifice to protect our democracy.
Each and every day, democracy itself is in peril. Here at home and around the world. What we do now, how we honor the memory of the fallen will determine whether or not democracy will long endure. Democracy thrives when the infrastructure of democracy is strong. When people have the right to vote freely and fairly and conveniently. When a free and independent press pursues the truth, founded on facts, not propaganda.
Now to why it's such an uneasy time in our democracy. The president's very words come as several states are in the midst of passing laws that will restrict voting in our country. A legacy of the falsehood that the 2020 election was somehow rife with fraud, somehow stolen. Late last night, Democrats in the Texas state legislature staged a walkout to stop a sweeping Republican overhaul of state election laws. Their move meant that last night's session lacked a quorum, the minimum number of lawmakers required for a vote before the midnight deadline. Republican Governor Abbott, who supports the restrictive voting bill, has already indicated he will call for a special session of the legislature to restart this whole process. Democratic Texas lawmakers say they will be ready for that.
We have plenty of tactics and strategies at our disposal, and we will fight every single day to protect the sacred right to vote in Texas. We know what happened in Georgia. We know what happened in Florida. And if they steamroll us here in Texas, they're just going to march all across this country until they've made it very hard for everyone to vote.
Meantime, all the way in the east in Washington, Democrats on Capitol Hill are trying to figure out their next move after Republicans on Friday blocked the creation of an independent commission to investigate the 1-6 riot. The New York Times reports it this way. Senate Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker Nancy Pelosi are now planning their own committee investigations into the attack. Pelosi could also set up a select committee focused solely on the attack, handing Democrats unilateral subpoena power and a much longer timeline to investigate whatever they want. Democratic Congressman Jason Crow, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and then famously witnessed the 1-6 attack from the balcony in the gallery, says his caucus needs to find some way to get to the bottom of what really happened on that day.
This has to get done. I am sick of playing the game of whack-a-mole with GOP members in the Congress. Every time we address one of their concerns, another one pops up. We just can't continue to do that forever. We need to get answers.
Today was also the first holiday with the pandemic seemingly in retreat in our country, with restrictions largely rolled back and over 51% of adults now vaccinated. There were crowds just about everywhere the weather would allow it. There's still much work to be done, though. The president has set that goal of 70% of American adults to be vaccinated fully by July 4th. That's a number the experts now say should be very achievable. And Peter, I'd like to begin with you. Given the life you have led in this country and overseas, given all the stories you have chronicled as a journalist, how bracing, how striking was it to hear an American president declare our democracy in peril on this Memorial Day 2021?
Well, I think what we've learned in recent times is that the democracy we all thought was pretty well cemented is in fact fragile. The institutions, the norms, the standards, the traditions that we believed were rock solid in the United States have their vulnerabilities, just as we've seen in other countries around the world. I spent 4 years living in Moscow, where I was a correspondent for the Washington Post. I traveled and reported from the Middle East. I've traveled from countries all around the world. And we've seen, I think, in recent times, stories here that I would have only imagined we would have covered as foreign correspondents. And I think that's why you're right, that today has a certain poignancy, because the people who fought and died to protect this country, whose memories we honor today, did so with the idea that they were, defending a robust and healthy democratic system, one I think that we do need to continue to protect and guard, whether it be on the battlefields or in our society today. And that's, I think, one thing we all focus on today, no matter what party we're in, whether in journalism, whether in government or politics. We give thanks for those who have stood up for us. We think about the role that we ourselves have to play in making this a more perfect nation, as they say.
Abby, to Peter's last point, that somehow brings this story to you because it brings the story to Texas, and the prong of this that Republicans in that state are busy and trying to achieve. Tell us how long Democrats can stave this off. How long can the impact from a walkout last, and what power the governor and Republicans have regarding a special session?
Well, the special session is called by the governor. Otherwise, Texas actually has an incredibly weak executive. But the how long is really not the specific question. It's when. So the governor, there will be a special session in the fall, almost no matter what, to account for redistricting and the census delay of that. But the governor's, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is urging him to call one in June. So it's a matter of when do they pick it up again, in June or the fall. And it's very unlikely Democrats will in the end be able to override this. And in some ways, this bill could get worse for them. And so it's very much up in the air. But I think it did inject some enthusiasm into the state party, into national Democrats to have a cause specific on this voting rights issue to jump onto.
I want to return to this topic with you in a moment after we hear from Neil. And Neil, we've asked 30 different versions of this question to you and the former feds who we rely on during times like this. What power does the federal government have? What power does the Department of Justice have when Republicans in legislatures are working so hard and in some cases passing laws signed by the governor to restrict voting?
So before getting to that, Brian, I think there's a bigger point here. There's a forest, and this forest, I think, unites a lot of what we're talking about tonight, not just Texas and this state, but the January 6th Commission, Biden's remarks you just adverted to, And the name of it is that the Republican Party has become an anti-democracy party. And when the Democratic Party was named and originated, I don't think anyone thought it'd be controversial to be like in favor of democracy. Who would be against that? But now we know that you have to view this Texas vote in light of so much else that the Republican Party has been doing, like a concerted effort in Georgia and other states to roll back voting, a slavish devotion to a filibuster that bears no relationship to the filibuster our founders knew, that's totally empowering of a small minority. You've got a party who's scared, heaven forbid, to have people vote in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. You've got a party who's hell-bent on getting their nominees to the Supreme Court to strike down legislation that they don't like that's been passed by a majority of people. This is an anti-majority party in the end. And it's a collapse party. It's a party that's lost its moral ground. It's like the USSR in the Cold War. Yes, they've got bluster and strength and insults, but they don't have any purpose anymore. And so to answer your question, because of the Supreme Court decision in 2013, the federal government is fairly limited in the powers it has. I argued the case in 2009 that saved that part of the Voting Rights Act, but it was reversed in 2013 by a 5-4 vote. And so right now, pending in Congress is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would restore that act. And so when Texas tries to pass a bill like this, it would require pre-clearance in Washington, D.C. by a court or by the Justice Department. That's the way stuff's operated since 1965. But now it isn't because of that new Supreme Court decision. So we need that law passed. Without it, I do fear we're going to have more and more antics like this from a party that's bent on these antics.
It is Tuesday, the 1st of June of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Well, speaking of the spice trade, spicy, huh? It looks like Trump is expecting to be reinstated by August, which is in just a couple of months. And then we had yesterday Flynn calling for a coup like in Myanmar. Burma. He meant Burma. Just like the military did there. And what did the military do there? Well, they killed a bunch of people. To prove a point. They wanted to show who is the boss. And now they are the boss. So Trump is expecting to be reinstated in August. Flynn is calling for a coup. And I guess if you want to save democracy, you are the anti-American one. Yeah, commie. Only commies want to save democracy. Okay. So how was your Memorial Day? Did you enjoy it? Well, enjoy your short week. All right? You have the Memorial Day weekend to thank for it. So now that we're over that, we can move on to what the next holiday is going to be. Joe promised that by July 4th, he would have a certain amount of vaccinations out there. And he lied. He lied about that number. Because by July 4th, it looks like he's going to have about a little over twice the number of shots vaccinations to stop this pandemic. He's exceeded expectations, so something must be wrong. And if there isn't, then you can expect the media to manufacture it. Which reminds me, speaking of manufacturing, Tucker Carlson yesterday on Memorial Day accused U.S. troops of shirking their duty. In other words, overthrowing democracy. You're not overthrowing democracy. Is Fox News, the Fox channel, still on military bases? In many cases, military bases would only allow Fox on the television in their various places, the mess, the barracks, etc. Do they have TVs in the barracks? I don't know. But anyway, wherever the military personnel would congregate together on base and there were TVs around, Fox News is on. I would think that wouldn't be allowed. But I know Fox does sports because, the Nazis kind of wormed their way into consciousness. Go to sleep. Just watch the Olympics. Sports can be used in a political fashion. That's why they came down so hard on Colin Kaepernick. And why they are coming down so hard on Naomi Osaka. How dare she say that she won't be subjected to, inane, intimate questions about her intimate life. Let alone having to answer like, well, why did you put the spin on the ball that particular way, that particular point in the set in a match that lasted almost 4 hours? And if you can't answer that, what's wrong with you? Who wants to sit there for that? A professional athlete is not the government. They don't infringe upon the freedom of the press, okay? The freedom of the press has as much right to ask their questions, I suppose, as it is for anybody to just say, I'm not even going to stand here for this. I didn't see any of the international tennis bodies up in arms when Dvorak, that guy, when he refused to speak to the press during the U.S. Open. What's up with that? Oh, yeah, he's not a woman. And he's definitely not Asian and black. Jeez. So this young woman, Naomi, said for her mental well-being, she's not going to answer questions. And if they're going to force her to, then she doesn't have to play this Masters tournament. And it looks like they want to punish her and say, well, you won't be playing anymore at all either. Really? You're going to take the reigning champion and tell her, you can't play because we're the boss. I like the idea where professional athletes sign a contract to make a bunch of money, say, and because they're making a bunch of money, they can be treated like slaves. Here, we're just going to trade you. I know they don't trade in tennis, but I'm just making a point. They got a plantation called a sports team. Members on that sports team sometimes get broken up from their families and sent somewhere else. Bye. Okay. It always seemed odd to me that in a representative democracy that a ball player could be treated like a slave. Because, it's the only way it can work. All right. I think we heard that before. It's the only way it can work. Yeah, well, stop treating Naomi Osaka like a mule. Okay? She's not your mule. Stop beating her. Please. Just let her play. Okay, well, so much more going on in the world. Ken Klippenstein. I love that guy. He's the FOIA request king, one of them. And he tweeted out to various Republican insurgent electeds that it being Memorial Day, he posted a picture. I mean, I guess you have to be of a certain age to know that was Lee Harvey Oswald when he was a private or some low-ranking member of the military, because he learned how to shoot in the military, U.S. military. And Klippenstein said to, for instance, Matt Gaetz. Who else? Just Grassley, all sorts of different Republicans who were turning out to be insurgents, by the way. Said, this is my grandfather, and he's a big fan of yours. And he would just be thrilled if you retweeted this. And they did. And then when they found out what was up, oh my God, that's Lee Harvey Oswald. They tried to delete the tweet. Well, you know what? Deleting is not a time machine where you can go back in time. That's not how it works. Well, it looks to me that only the most idiotic, the most ill-informed, the most ignorant, and dare I say the most arrogant, with all of those attributes that preceded, are the only ones who want to destroy democracy. Because you got to be an idiot to get rid of representative democracy. Yeah, well, here we are. And Joe laid it out at the top there. This is broken down by Brian Williams and crew, plus other stories as well. But democracy as we know it is in grave danger. I'm glad that Joe said that during Memorial Day. And we need to do something about it before it turns into a conflagration of secession, family against family, brother against brother, brother against sister, sister against brother, sister against cousin, cousin against uncle. I think Vlad likes it. Why was Lindsey Graham, just to change the subject a little bit here, why was Lindsey Graham on Memorial Day getting pictures with Bibi? Because, I'll tell you why. Because Israel was closer to get to than Moscow. Okay, if you're going to have a photo taken with a demagogue, why not Bibi? He needed some help, apparently. Since somebody as right-wing, I don't know if this billionaire rival of his is as right-wing or more right-wing, but they're of the right-wing, another party. Other than Likud, I made somewhat of a mistake and reported yesterday this billionaire rival actually has another party, but right-wingers, they all seem the same to me. Anyway, in forming a coalition government, this fellow is responsible for pushing Bibi out, and Bibi may be losing power for the first time in decades, which would be good. And but Bibi needs help, and where was Lindsey Graham on Memorial Day? Helping Bibi, because when you're working, you're working. And when you're a maggot and a slime ball like Lindsey Graham, you got to work it hard every day. Okay, well, what's on the rest of the menu? Yes, democracy is in grave danger. And we not only need to vote, but I think we might actually need to do a little bit more action than that, too. I'm not talking about what they're talking about, but we better prepare ourselves to, punch a few Nazis, so to speak. And as I've said before, every time you vote, you're punching a Nazi, maybe even 10. So maybe our voices need to be heard more than just our votes. I know our vote is a voice. But we might need to write some letters. We might need to lobby our representatives and others. We're all in this together. What's on the rest of the menu here? Starting off in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, well, California is moving to ease zoning laws so developers can convert shuttered malls and stores into new housing. Got to do something. I mean, these big boxes are just standing there, wasting away. They could. Actually, when I saw this, I thought this might be a good idea. The infrastructure is all there for a community. A conservation group is planting milkweed along the West Coast to help the migrating monarch butterfly. They took a count in this last migration and only had 2,200. That is a collapse. And a reappraisal of an iconic Northwest missionary shows his legacy was mostly fabricated. And you might be able to say that for the whole of Christianity, too, you might. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where two former owners of a toxic steel plant in southern Italy were each sentenced to more than 2 decades in prison. And the Russian military will form 20 new units along its western border to counter what it says is a massive military buildup by NATO. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. And if you would please then look across the page to the left, across from the chat room link near the bottom of our homepage that just happens to be at netrootsradio.com, and there is a live player button at the top too. As you scroll down, you'll see it as you just open up and splash on the page. But near the bottom, across to the left, is the link to our Patreon page. And we have that there, even though the bulk of how we pay for this operation of resistance comes out of our own wallets. We would be unable to do it without you. And your generosity over all these many years, which actually turns out to be over 10 now, because it was in February and March that we officially started our 24/7, 365 resistance broadcast 10 years ago. Yeah, a whole decade. And your generosity, once again, as I mentioned, has allowed us to do so. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds our way once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare, and we have 10 years of experience of doing so. And then, after stretching those dollars beyond compare, we pay our bills, fly under the radar because they still use that old technology, and continue this resistance against the Nazi takeover of the United States of America. Yes, it's come to that. The Nazis are just saying, hey, we're Nazis, and we're going to goose step all over everything. Just try to stop us. Do we let them get away with it? Have we ever before? No. And we have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty in resisting that Nazi takeover. Thank you so much. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it's very simple. You just go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that and a whole lot more, too. The infrastructure of Netroots Radio would be non-existent without Tom. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that posted up on Twitter, I guess, towards the end of the month. Well, the middle of the month or so. Zuckerberg will allow me to start posting there again. Only for a few days, because I'll find some other inane reason to get rid of me and a bunch of others, too. At just the weirdest appropriate times, too. During this Nazi takeover of the United States of America. But yeah, look for those show notes and links. They're very important because that's where the real reportage is. Follow the show on Twitter @CookbookWest, and please do pick up podcasts and rate and review as requested. And you can find podcasts at Speaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. Gunner the English Bulldog, our snoozing sous chef, is snoozing away, so you know he's working. He's working hard, and we love him for it. All right. Let's get on with this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It is a salon, you know. And we'll go to the chef's table in just a bit. But right now we're in the Bistro Cafe. And here's an offering that comes out of the Associated Press by Adam Beam. California state lawmakers are grappling with a particularly 21st century problem. What to do with the growing number of shopping malls and big box retail stores left empty by consumers shifting their purchases to the web. A possible answer in crowded California cities is to build housing on these sites, which already have ample parking and are close to existing neighborhoods. You know, Oakland did this, 40 years ago or more? The Sears Roebuck. Oh, I guess it wouldn't have been 40, but close to 30, 25 to 30 years ago, the Sears Roebuck space along Broadway was converted into housing and retail on the first floor. So it's not a new idea, but zoning laws are rather strict, and to get a zoning law changed is not easy in California. Local zoning laws often don't allow zoning at these locations. Changing the zoning is such a hassle that many developers don't bother trying. And it's often not worth it for local governments to change the designations. They would prefer to find new retailers because sales tax produces more revenue than residential property taxes. And you can thank Jarvis and Gann and Proposition 13 for that. However, with a stubborn housing shortage pushing prices to all-time highs, state lawmakers are moving to pass new laws to get around those barriers. A bill that cleared the Senate last week would let developers build houses on most commercial sites without changing the zoning. And another proposal would pay local governments to change the zoning to let developers build affordable housing. There has always been an incentive to chase retail and a disincentive to build housing, said Senator Anthony Portantino, a Los Angeles area Democrat who authored the bill to pay local governments. There is more dormant and vacant retail than ever. If successful, it is believed California would be the first state to allow multifamily housing on commercial sites statewide. Now, developers who use the law would still have to obey locally approved design standards, but Phillips said the law would limit local government's ability to reject the projects. That's why some local leaders oppose the bill, arguing it undermines their authority. City leaders have had the requisite local knowledge to discern when and which sites are appropriate for repurposing and which are not. Oh, really? Not in your backyard, you mean? It's a familiar battle in California. While everyone agrees there is an affordable housing shortage, state and local leaders face different political pressures that often derail ambitious proposals. Last year, a bill that would have overridden local zoning laws to let developers build small apartment buildings in neighborhoods reserved for single-family homes died in the state Senate. Senator Ana Caballero, a Democrat from Salinas, an author of this year's zoning proposal, said her bill is not a mandate. Developers could choose to use the bill or not. The Senate approved the measure 32-2, sending it to the state assembly for consideration. Even before the pandemic, big box retail stores were struggling to adapt as more people began buying things online. In 2019, after purchasing Sears and Kmart, Transformco closed 96 stores across the country, including 29 in California. Wow. The pandemic, of course, accelerated the trend, prompting major retailers like JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, and J.Crew to file for bankruptcy protection. An analysis by the investment firm UBS shows online shopping will grow to 25% of all retail sales by 2025. The analysis predicted that up to 100,000 stores across the country could close. Local governments and developers in California are already trying to redevelop some retail sites. In Salinas, a city of about 150,000 people near the Monterey Peninsula, city officials are working to rezone a closed Kmart. In San Francisco, developers recently announced plans to build nearly 3,000 homes in the parking lot that surrounds the Stonestown Mall, a sprawling 40-acre site that has lost some anchor retail tenants in recent years. And that's right next to San Francisco State University. Yes, the Lakeshore District, to be exact. Still, the idea of repurposing shopping centers has divided labor unions and affordable housing advocates, putting one of the Democratic Party's core base of supporters against backers of one of their top policy goals. Staff at the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A conservation group is planting more than 30,000 milkweed plants in California in the hope of giving western monarch butterflies new places to breed. The San Francisco Chronicle reported yesterday, Monday, that the River Partners Group has joined with others and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on the plantings along the Sacramento, Feather, and Kern rivers. The plants are seen as critical because the orange and black butterflies lay their eggs on them. Their caterpillars also eat the milkweed. The butterflies head south from the Pacific Northwest to California each winter. Earlier this year, researchers said an annual winter count recorded fewer than 2,000 of the butterflies, a massive decline. There couldn't be a more critical time to be doing this, said restoration biologist Francis Ulep of River Partners. Scientists have said the butterflies are at critically low levels in western states. At 2,000, I would think so, because of the destruction to their milkweed habitat along their migratory route as housing expands and the use of pesticides and herbicides increases. Maybe there could be a follow-up to the preceding story. Maybe we should have a campaign that follows the motto, convert big box retailers into housing, save the butterflies. Nicholas K. Garanios of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. For generations, Marcus Whitman has been widely viewed as an iconic figure from early Pacific Northwest history, a venerated Protestant missionary who was among 13 people killed by the Cayuse tribe near modern-day Walla Walla, Washington in 1847. But this past year has seen a continued reappraisal of Whitman, whose actions have increasingly been viewed as imperialistic and destructive. The Washington legislature voted to strip his likeness from the U.S. Capitol. Students at Whitman College in Walla Walla demonstrated recently to demand another Whitman statue be removed from campus. A new book says a well-known story about Whitman's efforts to save the Northwest from British rule was fabricated. The developments come amid a nationwide movement following George Floyd's death last year to shed Confederate monuments and depictions of historical figures who mistreated Native Americans. Statues of colonizers have been targeted in several states. Marcus Whitman is known for leading a small group of missionaries in 1836 into what was then Oregon country, a region about the size of Alaska. He established the Whitman Mission at a spot near the Walla Walla River, and the missionary was in the territory of the Cayuse tribe, which was wary of the white settlers, and I wonder why. Whitman and his wife, Narcissa, were strict Calvinists who preached a demanding version of Christianity that proved unpopular with the tribe. I wonder why. In more than a decade of effort, they managed to convert only 2 members of the tribe, said Blaine Hardin, an author and former New York Times and Washington Post reporter who wrote the newly published Murder at the Mission about the massacre. Whitman was a mediocre missionary, Hardin told the AP, but the mission became an important stop along the Oregon Trail from 1843 to 1847, and the Cayuse became suspicious that the white settlers were coming to take their land. I think their suspicions were fulfilled, huh? After a few years, the Whitmans lost interest in the Cayuse and spent their time trying to convert white settlers. I wonder how successful he was. Whitman eventually decided the Native Americans needed to give way to the settlers. Oh, so they were right. You're coming to steal the land. An 1847 measles outbreak killed half the local Cayuse. The illness also broke out in the mission, but more white settlers survived. Some of the Cayuse blamed the devastation on Whitman and his wife, and the Cayuse had a tradition of killing failed medicine men. And Whitman, a medical doctor, was warned to leave the area. The Cayuse attacked the mission and killed the Whitmans and 11 others, and those deaths shocked the nation. Oh, wow. After the massacre, the settlers of the region sent a delegation to D.C. and used the massacre to motivate Congress to make the Oregon country an official part of the U.S., completing the continental nation. Prior to that, the region that became the states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho had been jointly held with the British. The killing of Whitman was the trigger that made Walla Walla part of the United States. 20 years after the massacre, fellow missionary Henry Spalding manufactured a false story about Whitman. Spalding contended that Whitman had traveled to D.C. and persuaded President John Tyler to stop the British plot to steal the Oregon Territory from the United States because the United States was already in the process of stealing it from the Indians. And there is no evidence that Whitman actually did this, though, the historian said, Hardin. But Spalding relentlessly promoted that story, and it became the popularly accepted myth, printed in history books for decades. The myth was debunked in 1900 by a Yale professor and was dropped from wide use. Now, Whitman's name still adorns landmarks across the Pacific Northwest, including many schools, streets, a hotel in Walla Walla, a county in eastern Washington, a national forest in Oregon, and a glacier on Mount Rainier. In 1953, a heroic statue of Whitman was placed in Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C., as one of 2 representing Washington State. He is standing wearing buckskin garments and holding a thick Bible and saddlebags. Some people grumbled about the false story of Whitman's achievements even then. Hardin noted that Whitman College has taken concrete steps for decades to distance itself from the Whitman myth. That includes moving a statue identical to the one in Statuary Hall to a remote corner of the campus. And the college in 2016 voted to change its mascot from the missionaries to the Blues in honor of a nearby mountain range. There are no plans to change the name of the elite college. Indeed. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, We will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Nearly 350 years ago, the Dutch scientist Antonie van Leeuwenhoek scraped some white stuff off his teeth, as thick as if it were batter, he wrote, and peered at it under one of his handmade microscopes. What he saw was alive. He described it as many very little living animalcules, very prettily a-moving, the biggest of which shot through the water or spittle like a pike does through the water. What he had discovered in the plaque from his teeth, the animalcules, that was bacteria. And before van Leeuwenhoek's observations of bacteria,
nobody could have discovered bacteria because they didn't have the optical resolution.
Lambert van Eyck is a materials scientist at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. He says some of van Leeuwenhoek's microscopes could magnify things more than 200 times. And contemporaries like Robert Hooke in England, who'd written a book full of microscopic observations, they were stunned by his findings.
Robert Hooke actually spent quite some effort trying to discover why was Antonie van Leeuwenhoek so skilled and what kind of mysterious ways of producing the lenses made him able to see for the first time bacteria.
But van Leeuwenhoek wasn't eager to reveal the secrets behind the hundreds of microscopes he built.
Some people have explicitly asked him about the lenses, and he never said anything about it. It's still a big mystery how these lenses were made after 350 years. And the only way that they could discover would be to break it open, and then you would obviously see what the lens would be like, but they're too precious.
That's where Lambert van Eyck comes in. He and his colleagues were able to peer inside several of van Leeuwenhoek's microscopes with a non-destructive technique called neutron tomography. It's the same idea as a CT scan, but it uses neutrons instead of X-rays. And what they found surprised them. Instead of using lens types unknown to other scientists of his day, van Leeuwenhoek had just installed a common type of ground and polished lens in one of the microscopes they examined, and in the other, one of his most powerful scopes, he had used a globe-shaped lens produced by flame working, a lens type that his scientific competitor, Robert Hooke himself, had already described.
And so now the ironical thing is that actually, most likely, it's the method of Robert Hooke himself that Antonie van Leeuwenhoek used.
The findings are in the journal Science Advances. Van Eyck points out that van Leeuwenhoek was still an extremely skilled craftsman and glass grinder, able to build the finest microscopes of his day. And his discoveries of blood cells and sperm cells, parasites and bacteria, they were altogether extraordinary. It just seems the types of lenses he used to do that work were anything but. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2000. That was the day meat packers at the Dakota Premium Foods in St. Paul, Minnesota, staged a 7-hour sit-down strike for health and safety. They protested assembly line speed up, being forced to work while injured, and the dreaded gang time supervisors used to avoid paying overtime. Remarkably, the organizing drive came after the workers took action on their own behalf. The United Food and Commercial Workers Union had organized the plant briefly in the early 1990s. They quickly lost ground when the company pressed a successful decertification campaign after refusing a first contract. This time, workers found that as the assembly line pace increased, so did the rate of injuries. Workers came into the plant that morning resolved to make a stand. Management bullied them for hours throughout the day to give up. Finally, management was forced to concede to many of the workers' concerns, including observation of line speed changes and uniform hours of work. Workers eagerly signed UFCW cards, while the company unleashed its propaganda campaign to scare workers away from the union. Management claimed workers would have to pay outrageous sums in union dues, that they'd lose their medical benefits, and that their names would be turned over to the federal government. The undocumented among the workers, some of whom were the best union fighters in the plant, were unshaken by these threats. Then the company began targeting the strike leaders with firings and endless job transfers. Workers solidly stood their ground, and the UFCW overwhelmingly won the NLRB election a month later. The union successfully weathered years of continued harassment, threats, and decertification campaigns, but could not survived the closing of the plant in 2014.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 62 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a record high of about 101 and 102, which means it could be 106, depending on where you're standing. Yes, indeed. It looks like we'll have those record high temperatures today with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. With sunny conditions, I think you would expect that. Clear skies tonight, lows in the low to mid 60s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Sunny skies tomorrow with near record high temperatures. They're saying about mid 90s to 100, which will probably be over 100. Winds will then be out of the northwest at 5 to 10. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County, and these are not updated totals because of the holiday, now stand at 11,208. We should get the updated totals either later today or early tomorrow. Maybe we'll have them by showtime for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We'll see. Confirmed deceased remain at 143. Grass pollen is very high right outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good, though it has gone up to 49 parts per million, just about ready to go into the moderate range. And that daytime UV index remains very high at 9. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.99 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 69%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 76 and sunny. Paris is 82 and sunny. Rome is 76 and sunny. Kyiv is 60 and fair. Kabul is 80 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 76 with rain showers in the vicinity. Tokyo is 68 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 55 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 and partly cloudy with a fog advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York, New York is 70 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Two former owners of a troubled steel plant in southern Italy were convicted yesterday, Monday, of toxic pollution that prosecutors say cost hundreds of lives. They were each sentenced to more than 2 decades in prison. Brothers Fabio Riva and Nicola Riva, the former owner and managers of the Ilva steel plant in the southern city of Toronto, once Europe's largest, were convicted of criminal association aimed at provoking an environmental disaster, poisoning the food supply, and willful omissions of workplace safety measures. They were sentenced to 22 years and 20 years, respectively. 2 other managers were also found guilty in the case and sentenced to more than 2 decades, among them the 24 former managers convicted in the 5-year trial. Wow! The former governor of Puglia, Nicolo Vendola, was convicted of aggravated bribery, accused by prosecutors of having put undue pressure on an environmental official to soften his position on the toxic emissions. That official, Giorgio Asinato, meanwhile, was found guilty of not reporting Vendola's pressure and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He denied being persuaded by Vendola, a left-wing politician who also denied wrongdoing, and said the verdict had trampled the truth. Vendola has vowed to appeal. Verdicts are not considered final in Italy until 2 levels of appeal are exhausted.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Vladimir Isachenkov of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Russia's military will form 20 new units in the country's west this year to counter what it claims is a growing threat from NATO. Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, made the announcement at a meeting with top military officials. He pointed to a growing number of flights by U.S. strategic bombers near Russia's borders, deployments of NATO warships, and increasingly frequent and major drills by alliance forces. He charged that such actions, quote, destroy the international security system and force us to take the relevant countermeasures, end quote. And then he continued, we will form another 20 units and formations in the Western Military District until the year's end. He added the military units in Western Russia have commissioned about 2,000 new pieces of weaponry this year. Asked about Russia's plans, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg noted that Russia over the last years has invested heavily in new modern military capabilities, from conventional to nuke weapon systems, and has been willing to use military force against neighbors in Georgia and the Ukraine. Currently, thousands of NATO troops, several warships, and dozens of aircraft are taking part in military exercises stretching across the Atlantic, through Europe, and into the Black Sea region. Rattle the sabers, boys. Rattle the sabers. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.